Welcome to Legislative Updates. I'm your host, Doug Thompson, with my co-host, John Barker. And as you're watching this on your screen, that's John on the far left. And in between is Ron Highland, the representative from the 51st District, which is out of the Wamego area. And as you like to say, the free world. That's what John always said. I represent the free world.
Free world.
Well, we appreciate you being here. So John, give me an update. What's happened in the legislature now?
Well, since last Friday, when we had Troy Waymaster on,
right?
We talked about being turnaround. We didn't go back this week, and I went up Tuesday night. We went back in and had committee meetings, and we're at session on Wednesday and Thursday of this week. In my committee, we passed out a couple of alcohol bills, and on the floor, we did not go on general orders. We just met, kind of looked at strategies, and read in all the bills that the Senate had passed and sent to the House. And that was quite a few. It took probably 30 minutes for the reading clerk to read all those bills in. Now they're getting dispersed out to all the different committees to have hearings on the Senate's bills. I got several of them, and so I'm going to be having hearings on them next week. Although I'm an exempt committee, I'll still be hearing this coming week several bills, one of them being, of course, the sportsbook betting bill that I've worked on for the last couple of years. Senate did pass a version, of course, the House version is much better, and so we're going to take that up on Wednesday and Thursday of this coming week. But a couple of other things that was interesting that did happen this week is, and I would tell the folks out listening, go to the legislative website and look up House Bill 2540. I think back in January we had on one of the shows we talked about the at-risk kids and more than $400 million that the legislature had put in for at-risk kids. My post-audit committee had an audit of that, and very little of that money could be identified as being spent on at-risk kids. And the at-risk are the 20% that are not reading at grade level and not performing up to standard. So we thought we needed to put money designated for the at-risk to raise that level. The post-audit showed that some of the money was actually spent on playground equipment and some other things. And there was quite a bit of excitement about the report. So we introduced a bill, 2540, which has some accountability that the school districts have to come in and show that they are actually spending that money on the at-risk to get them to grade level. So that's going to be a good bill. You can watch that as it progresses through the legislature. The other interesting happening this week was the United States Supreme Court rendered a decision on a Kansas case that the Attorney General Derek Schmidt had taken up. It had to do with illegal immigration and identity theft. And he had prosecuted several individuals on identity theft. And they took it up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court preempted that and said, no, you can't do that. And so he took it on, he thought he could, took it up to the United States Supreme Court, and I found it very interesting. Judge Alito on the United States Supreme Court, and I'm going to make sure I get this quote right, he said, talking about the Kansas Supreme Court, he said, their interpretation is flatly contrary to the standard English usage of the language. And this is about 10 times. I think they're probably, as a state Supreme Court, they've been overturned by the United States Supreme Court more than most state Supreme Courts. But so they've sent it back to the Supreme Court, the Kansas Supreme Court, to look at that and probably go back to the trial court and either try the case again. But it is interesting. It doesn't happen that often. I know on the car cases, which is the murder cases in Wichita, the Supreme Court of Kansas has been overturned, I think 8 times on that one case by the United States Supreme Court. And a number of those reversals were unanimous. So, the United States Supreme Court's got some liberals, got some conservatives on it, but those are remands back to the Kansas Supreme Court were unanimous. Everybody agreed that they were wrong. So I found that that was interesting. Next week's going to be a good week. We've only got about 2.5 weeks left, so we'll be working pretty hard the next 2.5 weeks, and then I think it's the 3rd of April we take our break, first adjournment, and then wait 30 days, a little less than 30 days, because then we come back into the veto session, and that's where we address vetoes that the governor may have vetoed bills that we've sent to her. I've been on tax committee. One good thing, the Senate did pass 40-0 last week, or it would be this week, the income tax credit for the Eisenhower Foundation, and the vote was 40-0. I've passed it in the House before. The Senate wouldn't take it up. Now the Senate's passed it, so it now comes to the House.
All right, awesome. We're going to cut away, take a break. You're watching Legislative Updates. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Legislative Updates. I'm your host, Doug Thompson, with my co-host, John Barker. And our guest right in between us is Ron Highland, Representative, 51st District, which is Wamego. And Ron, you've been here before, but we haven't had you in for a while, and it's a pleasure to have you back. You're awfully busy with the legislature right now.
Yes, we are.
And I was reading your newsletter before because I'd forgotten some of that information, but before you got into the legislature, you were a veterinarian.
I was, still am.
No, still are. Yeah, still are. You didn't lose that ability,
Nope.
did you? So I know you've been extremely busy, so share with us what's going on in the legislature in your part of that world.
Well, I'm the chair of the Ag Committee, so that's where I spend the bulk of my time in Topeka. And you ask, and others have asked, what are the big issues you're dealing with this year? And the first one is property taxes. I hear complaints about property taxes everywhere I go. And so that one, and in case you don't know, property taxes are based on an 8-year rolling average for land net income, or the landlord net income, and LNI they call it. And so actually that becomes a 16-year average. So to smooth, and it smooths it out obviously, but because we had this period of time when we had high commodity prices, and so that peaked, and so everybody now is paying, because of that long time before it's averaged in, they are paying really high income rates right now. The calculations are for high income, but they aren't making high income, so they're paying high taxes but low income. So, and the commodity prices, as we know, they are down, partially because of tariffs and partially because of the pressures of global markets, which we've talked about before in this group. And then people complain to us at the state level, and they say, what are you going to do about our property taxes? We really can't do a lot about them because that is a local issue.
Right.
The mill levies are determined by both the municipalities and the counties. Now, of all the mills you see on your sheets, 21.5 mills go to the state. 20 go for the schools. They spread that all over the state. The schools that need more money, a little more help, they send the money to them. And then 1.5 mills goes to the state for state buildings. But all the rest on there are county.
If you look at the thing, you got 120 mills.
Right.
That 21 mills, or approximately 20 mills, goes to the state. The 100 mills goes to school districts, goes to counties, goes to cities. So we have little control over them.
And most people don't know that, do
No,
they?
they don't, because that's the first thing they talk about is can you do something with our property taxes? We really can't. We can address valuations because that's a formula like Ron's talking about with the ag land. We can address those issues, but no, it's a local issue.
And then on the pricing, that is a global issue at this point. And I showed you in the other meeting that we had here about how Brazil and Russia and Ukraine, you name it, all over the world are competing with us to sell their commodities, and they're beating up on us.
And they didn't used to.
And they didn't used to.
have the resources like in Brazil. They have excellent land apparently, but they didn't have the resources to be able to plant, to harvest. But they've got it going now.
And they sure do, and they are lowering the prices all over. So will that come back? I don't know. I've had farmers tell me that this is the new normal. So then we ask, well, what can we do? Maybe. And if the property tax calculations, if we would change that from an 8-year rolling average, which is 16 years, and change it back to something else. Well, I had Dr. Featherstone over at K-State run a bunch of calculations for me. And we looked at all of them. He took several counties and for comparison, different land types. But it came out that if you just switched it to an 8-year straight average, that it would smooth it out. And that's where that diagram that I have, and it shows you that the purple line is the variation in the commodity prices over these years. The red line is the 16-year average and how it's come up. And in 2016, it surpassed. If we change it to the 8-year straight average, that would be the blue line. It smooths it out. And this helps both the landowners and the county governments because they can see what's going to happen here before long. Eventually, that's going to drop off. And they're going to lose a lot of revenue because of this big drop-off that's coming. So those are things we can do. And according to all the things I'm reading on futures and what the future may look like for commodities, the remaining areas in the world where we could actually go out and maybe open our markets up would be Africa and Asia. Those are the markets that will at some point be ready. Now the governor has tried to move the ag marketing group, the people and all the money over to the Commerce Department, which I think is a bad move, and so I will be fighting that all the way. I want to keep it over in the ag department where they understand the farmers, they understand the commodities, and keep it where it belongs. So those are things we're doing at the state level, trying to help give some relief, and it's changing that calculation. I have a bill written. I will be submitting it to the tax meeting on Monday.
Tax committee? You
Tax
come see
committee.
me?
Yep, I'm going to bring it in, and
I will entertain that. It's Doug. One thing about I always give Ron. We came in the legislature together, and I, on occasion, when I want to be a little arrogant, I call him Doctor. Because not only is he a veterinarian, he has a PhD in research.
Yeah, I know. He used to lecture and teach.
And he does that, and he's probably one of the smartest people in the legislature. And I tell him that all the time, but that's okay. You don't have to be real smart to be in the legislature. But anyway, we have a lot of fun with
end
that.
on that one.
We're going to cut away, take a break. We'll be right back. You're watching Legislative Updates. Welcome back to Legislative Updates. I'm your host, Doug Thompson, with my co-host, John Barker. And, of course, in the middle is Ron Highland from the 51st District,
Yes.
The Wamego area, and everywhere in between almost, covering a lot of territory. And we were just talking off camera before we started about how many appointments you have, Ron, to where to keep your voters informed about what's going on in the legislature, because for many, they only get a snippet out of the newspaper and it may be somebody else's interpretation. And that's why we like, having John come out and go straight from the legislature and just share what's going on. John, what else have you got going on?
Ron and I came in the legislature at the same time. We ran in 12, came in 13. And we've been on, when he was chairman of education, I was on the education committee. When I still chair the Fed and State, he was my vice chair. Now he's chair of Ag, but he's also chair of what we call Rules and Regs. And this year he got to appear in front of my committee and introduce the bill. We worked the bill, and now he's going to carry it on the floor, hopefully next week.
Yep.
Want to talk a little bit about that, Ron?
Well, we in 2018 we passed a bill to try to change the culture where all these agencies come through and they write rules and regulations, and without ever asking a question, how much is this going to cost the people out there that it affects? And so we put a bill in and we said, okay, anything over $3 million that it's going to cost the public, you're going to have to go back through the system. And now they're conscious of that. They fought us for quite a while on that, but they got the message finally. And but what we found out was the budget director, we put too much on his plate. So he came to us and said, can we tweak that a little bit? So I put in a bill this year in John's committee to tweak that bill to where the budget director really doesn't have to look at those that are less than 3 million. He'll look at them, but he doesn't make any big decision or make any comments. And Rules and Regs, it's a joint committee, Senate and House members both. And they bring the rules in, and we look at them, and we go through them word by word, and we'll pester them and cause all kinds of problems. We enjoy that. And but we wanted to change the attitudes. It's working. And this bill then, every page that comes in has to be stamped by the Attorney General, Secretary of State, Department of Administration, and the Budget Director. So I look through all the pages. If they're not all stamped, I stop and say they have to go back. But the Budget Director, every time it got turned around between Department of Administration and Attorney General, it made it have to go back through the system again. So he was stamping those pages as many as 5 and 10 times. So we changed the order of how that occurs. So he's last instead of first.
And Doug, when we pass legislation, we leave a lot of room for rules and regs.
Too many.
Too many. And I agree with that. Because we'll pass a bill and say, well, we're going to let Health and Environment develop the rules and regs of how it's implemented. And sometimes they disregard the legislative intent and just do what they want. So with rules and regs, they review those.
So it comes back to Ron's committee then?
Ron's committee to look and see if
Okay.
these are outrageous, and then we can always introduce a legislation to correct them.
Okay.
And we've done that
Yes.
a number of times. I did that on the safety bill for amusement rides.
Yes, that was a big
Because they misinterpreted our legislative intent, so we had to go back in the following year and do a cleanup bill to say, no, this is not what we wanted you to do.
Yeah, I remember that.
Right, so.
That was a big deal, and it's serious what goes on. The first question we always ask is, what was the legislative intent?
Right.
You know, they show us what the passage was, and the Attorney General says, well, folks, that's what you said in the bill, so you can't stop them. So we have to go back and correct them sometimes, but it's not a fun job. It's an all day whenever we have a meeting. I was up there Tuesday all day going through rules and regs, and we do that about 4 or 5 times a year.
And the different departments, of course, they come in and they try to justify their rules and regs. But with this bill that you're carrying on the floor next week, I think the Budget Director is the last person to touch it. Instead of being one of the first people, and when it gets modified, it has to go back to the Budget Director. Now he'll wait to let all the Attorney General and all those agencies work it out, and then come to him last, and then he'll determine what the cost will be. And if it's under, what, $3 million, then it's okay. If it's over $5 million, then it may go back to rules and regs, and they'll have probably more questions of them.
Simply because of the cost and how,
Right.
and how that it was incurred?
Because that may have not been anticipated by the legislature when they passed the bill.
Right. And so there's a huge part of their document is always the economic impact statement.
Right.
And that's where we see what it's going to cost the people out here,
The
or
taxpayer.
the businesses, whatever. So that's been an important mission I've had with that committee.
And but we've, you know, Ron's very good at it. You know, we did all that research over the years. It didn't go to waste.
Yeah. Well, that's true. And you know, one of the things that I've noticed, John, we've talked about this before, and I've shared it with the viewers many times, that what an advantage it is that you have legislators that have been in for multiple times. You guys are working on, what would this be, your 7th of 8 years right now? Would you be?
We are actually on our 8th year.
Eighth year. So that usually results in the qualified people getting moved up into the positions of chair on committees. Man, much of that is because of the experience that they bring with it. And it looks like to me, as I have been listening to this for a number of years, there's a lot of things to know. So if you're just walking in, you got elected for the first time, and you think you're going to come in and set the world on fire, you better sit down and watch and listen and study and do those things before you go jumping up and say, here how I'm changing the world, because there's a lot of experience here.
And we have had to go in with what we call freshmen legislators and say, you can't do what you think you're doing.
Right.
But you know, most of them are very amenable. They say, okay, well, tell us how we should proceed. And as chairmen of committees, we help our young people. If they've got a piece of legislation they want, we try to help them get it through.
Good, good.
So.
All right, we're going to cut away, take a break. You're watching Legislative Updates. We'll be right back. Welcome back to our final session of Legislative Updates for this show anyway. In the middle between John and I, of course, is Ron Highland from the 51st District. And Ron, thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming in, taking the time to do it. And I know you've been busy and you got a lot of other things to do, but thank you for coming in and sharing this with us. And John, as always, thank you so much for coming in on a Friday, and it can be a long week and you can have a lot to do and places to go, and you still find time to stop in when you can get away from the legislature on time to be able to do it. And I know you got a lot coming up, and next week we'll just figure out if there'll be a show. It'll depend on if you're tangled up with the legislature. Why, we'll do one a little later.
Yeah, well, we may be on the floor all day Friday.
Okay.
Until late at night. So
I understand.
And that happens.
I appreciate you doing it.
Okay.
Hope you've enjoyed watching Legislative Updates. See you next time.